Sure. I mentioned that I went to accident reconstruction schools, and when you're fresh out of that, it was like 7 weeks. It's not one of those classes you go to and it's kind of fun. You're sitting around doing some stuff, and you get to go home maybe early, whatever. No, you had homework. I mean, it was intense. It was it was tough. That's why most guys drop out of it without finishing it. But I stuck it out and got through, and got through the classes, and I was waiting for my first one after being deemed a reconstructionist, and my first one happened to be a really bad one. So I was on my shift. I happened to be working the shift, and the call came of a serious crash, and my shift lieutenant was one of the first officers on the scene, and he immediately called for me to respond. Now, I'm probably 30 miles away in a different zone, 2 zones up, so it's going to take me a while to get there, but boy, that adrenaline rush goes down. It's going to be my first one, and at the time we didn't have total stations and the mapping stuff that does the scene for you. This is all going to have to be done freehand and the hard way, measured and marked, and you're going to have to do all this stuff and make a scale drawing without the use of a computer program. I didn't have any of that stuff yet. So I arrived on the scene, and what I had was a pretty horrific scene. So I had a Camaro that was going around a large radius curve that dropped 2 tires off the side, went into a yaw as it came back on, and yawed sideways into an oncoming vehicle. At the point of the crash, the Camaro tears in 2, right at the dashboard. So the front half goes spinning off, the rear half rolls over with 1 passenger in it, and 2 people from the front seat are both dead in the ditch. The guy in the other car hit is pinned in, and he's in very critical condition, and they're trying to get him unpinned out of that car. So I've got 3 dead bodies there. I've got a car ripped in 2. I've got a high speeds involved. So I started into this as my first one. It's really a heck of a crash to be doing for your first one, but I did get some help from the state, from my instructors from the state police on it. But I remember doing a speed workup based on the yaw marks that the Camaro left on the scene. So when I did my speed workup based on the yaw marks, I came up with a speed of 96.69 miles an hour at impact. Well, I've got a picture of the front half of the car, the dashboard. I've got a picture of the speedometer right at 96 miles an hour. So it froze right there at that impact. So that's a pretty good indicator that my math went okay on that. But my biggest problem on that whole crash is, who's my driver? So I've got, the one body that's in the back of the vehicle stayed there, back there. He's pinned in. That half rolled over. It's upside down. The front half did not. And I've got 2 bodies laying in the ditch to try to figure out who the driver is. So I use what's called body kinematics, where I was able to match up different parts of the car to injuries on the bodies to place who was in what position. So that was interesting, because the female was the driver, and she had a fractured leg up here at the top, and I was able to match the shifter, the automatic shifter, with causing that fracture. So that put her as the driver as she was ejected from the vehicle. So pretty tragic, but it was a huge crash scene, and it was stressful. But I got through it and got that one taken care of. So that was a pretty serious one. I had another one that was not a fatal. It was serious injuries. But it was as far as reconstructions goes, it was going to be a pretty easy one. I had a clear point of impact in 1 lane. The cars hit, call it driver to driver with rotation, and I get to do my thing at the scene, and I go to the hospital where both drivers are transported to. So I've got the names of, I know the driver of the van is the one who was in the wrong lane. Okay, so So I get to the hospital, and I'm getting the information from the people involved, and I asked them if they'd done blood work and stuff, and said, yeah, this person has a BAC of, a 0.14, something like that. I said, well, wait a minute, which one? Well, the person who was in the correct lane was drunk. Now that threw a whole new wrench into he was in his correct lane, but was hit by somebody in his lane that was not drunk. So yeah, that turned into an interesting case, so that wound up going to civil trials, and I had to testify in, and that was a pretty interesting case. But yeah, the accident reconstructions, I have a whole folder full of those that I did. And one of the worst was a 14-year-old who we had reports that was walking in a 4-lane roadway at night, wearing all dark clothing, walking in the lanes of roadway. Several cars had, a 55-mile-an-hour roadway had just missed him and had called in, hey, there's some kid walking in the roadway, he's gonna get hit. Well, he did. He was hit by one car and run over by another one. So the first one killed him anyway. The second one was inconsequential, but as I arrived on scene, it was pretty gruesome one. And as I arrived on scene, the deputies who were there shutting down the roadway, one was a new officer and a female, and as I'm getting the information to do my at-scene work and get photos of the body and what have you, I could tell she wasn't doing well. And I asked her, I said, are you okay? And she just shook her head no. And so we had her go sit in the squad car. It was really pretty hard, as a new officer, to see something like that. But I did doing my investigation, but I was struggling with why this kid was in the middle of that roadway, not perceiving the danger. Well, toxicology came back, and long story short, he'd been huffing helium with a buddy and glue, and that had distorted his, 14 years old, and he just was walking in the middle of the road just like there was no issue, and somebody came along, hit him and killed him. And then there was one more I'll talk to you about. I was off duty, and I got called that there was a fatal crash, and it was clear right on the county line with a neighboring county, but the crash was going to be ours to handle. So it was about 3 o'clock in the morning when I get the call. So I hurry up and throw my gear in my squad car and head down there. And I arrive on scene, and this is an older station wagon that had gone straight at a T intersection and straight into the ditch and impacted pretty hard. And I had a 16-year-old dead at the wheel. So lieutenant that's on the scene, just kind of briefing me on what they got, that the newspaper person had come upon the car. And so I'm looking in the vehicle, and I've got my flashlight, and I'm looking at the windshield, and the inside of the windshield, and it's broke. And I start getting a side view, and I asked the lieutenant, I said, where's the passenger at? The lieutenant says, well, there wasn't a passenger. I said, yes, there is. He said, what do you mean? I said, come here. So I start putting my flashlight on the edge of the glass, and you could see very short crew cut hair embedded into the glass. I said, and here's what happened. I said he couldn't get out of his door, passenger side door, so he crawled to the rear of the station wagon to try to get out, still couldn't get out, and then he crawled back to the front, and he went out the driver's side window to get out of the car. And he said, are you sure about this? I said, yeah, I'm sure. He's out here, he's injured, he's bleeding, his head's hit the windshield. We got to find this kid. So we're combing all the roads, looking for him and stuff, and finally we get the body removed from the vehicle, and we go with the coroner to make death notification. Not my favorite thing to do in law enforcement, but something we have to do. So talking to the mother, and I said, hey, listen, I know this is a terrible time, but I have to ask you a question. Did your son have any friends with a very short crew cut? And she says, yeah, his friend Casey. I said, where does Casey live? So, well, go a couple blocks down, turn. I said, okay, so myself and another reconstructionist, we head over to this kid's house and knock on the door. Of course, by now it's going on 5 o'clock in the morning, and his mother opens the door. I identified myself. I'm, Deputy Pridemore. I'm an accident reconstructionist. We need to talk to your son. Is he here? And she says, well, yeah, he's asleep on the couch. He's been here all night. He hasn't been anywhere. And that's great. If he hasn't been anywhere, that's great. Good. Can we just talk to him real quick? And, she takes an attitude with us. Oh, I suppose. You have to go wake him up. So I walk over there and I pull back the covers, and here's this bloody kid on the couch. And of course, she starts screaming and yelling, and he kind of wakes up, and we get EMS coming for him, and he's got a broken leg, and so I finally get to the point where I can interview him. And they tell me what happened, and he's going, this kid's dad, their parents went to sleep. We got some beer, and we were out cruising, and he crashed into the ditch, and I said, okay, but how did you get home? He said, well, I couldn't get out of the car, so I crawled into the back trying to get out that way, and I couldn't get out, so I crawled back in, and I had to crawl out his window. I said, okay. I said, what was his condition at that point? He said, well, he told me he was probably going to be fine. I said, so he was alive? And Casey said, what, he's not now? I said, no. You left him there and he died. Why didn't you call for, how did you get home? So he said, well, I went to this farmhouse and they let me call somebody to come and get me. I believe they gave him a ride home. I said, you didn't tell anybody that you had an injured friend still in the car? You left him there? And we went through the Illinois law books, and we couldn't find anything that we could charge him with on that. So he literally left his buddy there to die, and then went home, made it home with a broken leg and other injuries, and that was a bad case.